What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you for tuning in. If you're new here, please consider hitting that subscribe button for new videos. Leave me a like and give me a comment in the comments section. Today, I'm going to show you how to do an oil change on your KTM 390 Duke. This also applies to the KTM 125 Duke, the 200 Duke, and also the Husqvarna 401 series motorcycles. So I'm going to be using a full kit for this service. It comes with a new O-ring for your oil filter cover, the oil filter itself, 2 liters of Motorex synthetic blend oil, 15W50. It also comes with the lower strainer, which we'll go over later in the video, the strainer that's behind your drain bolt itself, and then also a new drain bolt that has a fresh O-ring on it as well. So in order to conduct this service, you're going to want to remove the belly pan, which I've already done. And also you're going to want to have the motorcycle at least slightly warm. I went ahead and I idled mine for about 10 minutes until the temperature gauge reached 4 bars. So the oil should be fairly warm enough that it's going to drain out fairly quickly and fluidly for us. So to start off, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and crack the oil filler cap on the right hand side of the motorcycle here and just place that aside for now. This will help air come in through this vent right here while we're draining from the other side. So the reason we took off the oil filler plug is so that way air can come into the engine, and that way oil will come out of our drain plug itself a little bit faster. So this right here is our drain plug. It's an 18mm hex. We're gonna go ahead and crack that off and drain the oil into our drain pan, or at least as much as we can at this point. That did have a fair amount of torque on it, so it took a little more effort than I thought. I'm wearing some nitrile gloves, and it's not really to keep myself nice and pretty. I know what it's like to get burned by oil, and I really don't feel like having that sensation today, so I'm just using them as a precaution. All right, there we go. So now we'll just let this drain until oil comes to either a slow drip or stops dripping at all, and we'll clean this area up, and then we'll replace it with our brand new plug. So now that this has come down to a pretty slow drip, we're going to reach in here with a pair of pliers, and we're going to grab the strainer and just pull it straight out, and then we'll let any excess oil continue to drain at this point. Some people like to save these, clean them off, and reuse them, but honestly, the kit for these is fairly inexpensive, and it catches a lot of the crap that's in these motors. I feel better about replacing this strainer and the one that's underneath we're going to take off as well. I'd feel better about these being brand new because they are made of plastic, and the mesh on here can eventually tear. So I just feel a lot better having fresh ones in there. They're very inexpensive and they don't add a whole lot to your oil change. The whole kit itself that I have over here you can find online for about $45 to $50. I bought it off somebody who got rid of their 390, and I got it for like 40 bucks off of him. So they're really inexpensive and it's good insurance. Okay, this has come down to a slow drip. We're gonna take our brand new mesh screen here. I'm gonna take a dab of the oil and I'm just gonna rub it around the O-ring that's on here. And then we're just gonna insert it and push this in until it slides in. It's clicked in there real good. Now we can go ahead and replace our drain bolt. Okay, so the manual says to torque this bolt to 11 foot-pounds, so I've got my ratchet extension on my torque wrench now, and I'm going to torque this to 11 foot-pounds. Now keep in mind, with an extension you lose a little bit of torque, so use your better judgment here, and just make sure it's seated all the way. So I let it click, and then I gave it just a little more. This thing doesn't need a whole lot of torque because it does have that O-ring, so it's not going to be like a traditional motorcycle that you might have had in the past that has a crush washer under there that requires more torque. So just keep in mind, you're only seating an O-ring in this case. So at this time, I'm just gonna come in here with a shop rag and just clean this area up of any excess oil that got on these parts while we were draining it, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next step. All right, so the next bolt we need to get to is right here. This is our lower strainer, and just like the other one, we're gonna replace it with a full replacement. I have the full replacement one right here. It has an O-ring right here at the top and an O-ring right here at the bottom. Now, I've already cracked this thing loose, and I'll tell you, it took quite a bit of torque. I wasn't using a very long ratchet handle, but man, I put so much torque on it that I actually scraped my hand up against my slider right here. So be careful when you're trying to get this one off. It took a whole lot of torque to get this one off. This is a 13mm bolt, by the way, versus the 18mm that we already took off for the main drain bolt. So essentially I'm just doing the same thing here. I'm gonna unscrew this and let the oil drain out until it stops draining. So there's our old screen there. Doesn't actually look all that dirty, to be honest. Looks fairly okay. The oil is quite a bit dark though, so we'll let the rest of this drain out here and then we'll replace it with our new one. I'll do the same thing. I'll put a little bit of oil on the O-rings, and then the manual says to torque this one to 11 foot-pounds also. I'm going to double check on that just to make sure, and then we're going to move on to our oil filter. And just to show you guys for reference, when I did the main oil drain bolt, I did have the bike on the side stand itself, but I decided to go ahead and switch over to my paddock stand while I'm doing the rest of this, just because I want the oil to flow in the direction of the next two things we're taking off, which is that bolt down there that I just released, and then the oil filter, which is on the other side. All right, so while that bottom drain bolt goes ahead and drains a little bit more, I'm gonna go ahead and remove these two 8mm or 5/16 bolts from the oil filter cover here. So we'll take this cover off, some oil is gonna come out, and then we'll be able to remove the main filter and replace it. So let me go ahead and do that now. There's not a whole lot of torque on these things, so it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to get them off. They only torque back up to about 8.9 foot-pounds. It's about the same as what we did on these bolts for the sliders in that last video. Some oil's gonna come out. There is an O-ring on this cover here that we are going to replace with the one that came in the kit. So I'll take this over there, clean it up real good, and then I'm gonna let this drain just a little bit before I go ahead and pull the filter out of there. So this oil filter, it can be a little bit tricky to get out. What I did was I took my snap ring pliers and I used one of the little hook sides and I shoved it in there, got behind the filter element and pulled it out. It'd be a lot easier if I had an actual pick or a magnet that I could stick to the front of this and just pull it straight out, but it is what it is. Some people have used flatheads in the past and so on and so forth. Just work with what you have and you can get this thing out. There's a little rubber piece on the other side that kind of press fits on there and holds it in place, but it's not too tight. You'll be able to get it out. So we'll go ahead and we'll pull the old oil filter out, and I'm going to set it in there. I'm going to let this drip drain until it comes to almost a complete stop, and then I'm going to take a clean paper towel or a clean rag and clean out the inner well in here as well before we put our new filter in there. Alright, so I got this all cleaned out, ready for the new oil filter. So here's our new oil filter right here. You can see this rubber plug right here. That end needs to go in first, and the metal side over here is going to go in right there. Now, a lot of people like to prime these with some oil before they put them in, but it gets pretty messy doing that, and honestly, I've had no issues not priming the oil filter before putting it into any motorcycle or car that I've owned in the past, so I'm just going to go ahead and press fit this in here. So when you push this in, you need to push it in and make sure it just fully seats. It doesn't really click or anything, but you'll know that it's all the way in there. And then right after that, we're going to come in with our cover cap, which I've already put the fresh O-ring on, and I've put a little bit of oil around it, just like all the other O-rings here. We're going to put that back into its place, and then we'll use our two bolts to hold it in. And the bolts say to use a torque spec of 8.9 foot-pounds. In the past, when I did these bolts right here for the slider cover, I just did them hand tight, got them torqued all the way down, and then I just gave like a little bit of extra on it. You'll know that it's tight enough, and you'll know when you're going too much, so just be really careful here. Also, while the camera was off, I went ahead and I put the bolt for the other lower strainer back in there. That was, you know, just the same as the regular drain bolt on the main side. All you got to do is put it in there and torque it up to 11 foot-pounds and you're good to go. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get these bolts back in place, and then we'll be ready to fill the bike up with oil. All right, so we're pretty much ready to go ahead and start filling up with oil. The manual states that the bike uses 1.7 liters. That's when it's at its full capacity. So we should be safe to go ahead and just pour the first liter in here and not have to worry about keeping an eye on the sight glass. On the sight glass, we're gonna have to start keeping an eye on that. On the next bottle, when we get about halfway through, we'll start making sure that this level has not risen too much. So in order to check your sight glass also, the bike needs to be sitting upright. Now I've got mine on the paddock stand, so it is sitting upright. If you don't have a paddock stand, you might want to go grab one of your buddies or your wife or somebody to sit on the bike for you, so that way it can be in the upright position, because the bike needs to be in the upright position in order to check the oil level properly. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fill this to 1.7 liters. And then we're going to start the bike up, let it warm up, because you should also check the oil level when the bike is warm. So let's go ahead and get this filled up. All right, so I'm going to start pouring in the second bottle now. So we're gonna keep an eye on this sight glass, especially when we start getting to that halfway point. So you can see the oil level just rose in the glass right there. It's about halfway up. I'm gonna add just a tiny bit more because I like it towards the upper line. A little bit more. So that should be good right there. Now at this time, go ahead and put the filler plug back into its spot, and then make sure that you go over all of the bolts that we've taken loose so far. Check their torque specs, make sure they're tight, and then start up the bike, let it come up to operating temperature, shut it off, and then wait about a minute, put it back in an upright position, and check this glass. Your oil level should be between this lower line here and the upper line right there. That's how you know you're at the proper oil level. I like to make sure that mine stays towards the upper level. If you do overfill just slightly, it's not a big deal, but in particular, you want to make sure you're not underfilled. Being a tiny bit overfilled is way better than being way underfilled. But if you do happen to fill this glass all the way up and you're not sure how much you went past, try to loosen up one of the bolts and just let a little bit of oil out until this comes down to the proper spec. Another thing you can do is create an apparatus with like a turkey baster or a syringe, and you can try to use a little tube down in here and suck some oil out as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove this, put the filler plug back in, and I'm gonna start the bike up and recheck the oil level. All right guys, so I warmed up the bike, the cooling fan kicked on, I called it at that point, turned it off. It's sat for about 2 minutes now, and as you can see, the oil sight glass is no longer full. So what has happened here is the oil has been picked up and put into the different parts of the engine, and it has filled in spaces that you're not able to fill by just simply pouring oil into the engine itself, right? So what we have to do now is replace the oil that it has moved and filled those areas with. So when I first filled up the bike, I only used about a half a liter out of the second bottle, and the bike's supposed to take 1.7 liters. So I should have approximately maybe that 0.2 that's gonna go in here. Could be a little bit less, but we'll see. So let's go ahead and start pouring this oil in. And we'll pour a little more. I like mine towards that top line, like I said. All right, so that should be good right there. So let me see. I've actually got about 0.1 liters left in the bottle at this point. So the bike should be plenty filled at this point in time. And now we're good to go out and get our riding done. So in order to reset our service interval, we're gonna turn on the motorcycle. It's not gonna be running at this point. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna hit the set button until we bring up the main menu, and we're going to scroll down to preferences. Mine's not actually due for service yet. I did my oil change earlier than the recommended interval, so I'm going to reset this to where it will remind me in about 3,000 to 3,500 miles to do my oil change again, because I like to do them a little sooner than what the recommended interval is. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hold the up and down arrows together until the service menu light pops up here. And as you can see, it says next service. I can set this to the next 300 miles. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the set button, and it's going to raise this by 300 miles each time I press it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this until it gets to, I'm going to do 3,600 miles, right? You can hold down on the set button, and it's going to go back to your preferences. I'll turn the bike off real quick, turn it back on, and we'll go back to our preferences here, go down to the service, and as you can see, it's telling us we have 3,599 miles left until our next service is due. So if you guys enjoyed this video and you found it helpful, please give it a like, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in the next video.